Amelia Parker had never felt the sting of winter so fiercely as she did on that desperate day. Snow piled high along the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains, the sky a foreboding gray that pressed down on her small frame. Each breath tore at her lungs. Every step through the drifts felt like trudging through a white grave. Her lips, raw and cracked from cold, trembled each time she exhaled. Just 2 days earlier, she had been traveling with a group of settlers' families searching for the dream of Western prosperity. But that dream had no room for an ailing widow unable to keep pace. She recalled their grim faces as they told her to remain behind. Illness had weakened her, and her presence had become a burden. Their leader, a hardened man who cared more for wagon wheels than human life, offered her only a few strips of dried meat, a canteen of half-frozen water, and a threadbare blanket before ordering the wagons to continue without her. She remembered his final words, a curt acknowledgement of regret, but with no intention of halting his journey. Then they were gone, leaving her standing alone in the swirling snow, heart pounding with a mixture of betrayal and dread. For hours, she forced herself onward through the punishing cold, hoping beyond reason that she might reach some settlement, some hidden cabin, or maybe overtake the wagons if they stopped. But as the gale intensified, all she could see was a landscape of relentless white. Her cheeks burned from the wind, and the growl in her stomach reminded her how little she'd eaten. Exhaustion tugged at her every fiber. When darkness encroached, and the howl of the wind became a roar, Amelia felt her strength slip away with each trudging step. She collapsed near a pine tree whose branches groaned under thick layers of snow. Her breaths came in ragged puffs, and for a moment, she resigned herself to the idea that no one was coming to save her. The sting of fear was sharper even than the cold. She shut her eyes, leaning her head against the rough bark, tears freezing on her lashes. It felt like the end. Yet unknown to her, watchful eyes had seen her plight. A lone figure, dressed in fringed buckskin and cloaked in buffalo hide, observed her from a higher ridge. He had remained hidden at first, wary of approaching a white stranger. Conflict had taught his people caution, but as he watched the solitary woman pitch forward into the drifts, he felt a pull stronger than fear. With the silent footfalls of a trained hunter, he moved toward her, guided by compassion and the primal sense that a life hung in the balance. Amelia, half conscious, felt rather than heard the approaching presence. She blinked through frosted lashes, heart lurching at the sight of a tall Cheyenne warrior, face painted with symbols she did not recognize. Panic flared. She had been told so many dark stories around campfires about hostile savages who roamed the frontier. Her first instinct was to recoil, but she lacked the strength even to stand. The warrior crouched beside her, speaking soft words in his language. Amelia didn't comprehend them, but the soothing tone eased her immediate terror. She realized, in a distant, dreamlike way, that if he had intended harm, he would have let her freeze. Instead, his expression carried the unmistakable mark of concern. Carefully, he lifted her into his arms, wrapping his thick cloak around her frail body. Despite her trepidation, the warmth of that fur felt like salvation. Against his chest, she drifted into a semi-conscious state, lulled by the steady rhythm of his stride as he carried her across the snow. When Amelia opened her eyes again, she found herself sheltered in a shallow cave. Outside, a blizzard raged, but inside, a small fire crackled, illuminating the stone walls. She realized her boots and damp stockings had been removed and placed near the fire to dry. The warrior Eagle Shadow, as she would soon learn, sat across from her, feeding the flames with measured gestures. He looked up when she stirred, and his face, painted with streaks of ochre and black, softened as their eyes met. She tried to speak, but her throat felt raw, and only a faint rasp emerged. He rose, retrieving a small pouch of water, motioning for her to drink. Amelia sipped, feeling heat trickle through her insides. She attempted a whisper, "Thank you." He inclined his head in quiet acknowledgement. Reaching for a piece of smoked venison, he handed it to her, urging her to eat. Though she was frightened, hunger overrode hesitation. Each bite tasted like life returning to her frozen limbs. In the flickering firelight, their guarded expressions told separate stories. Amelia was aware she owed her life to a man she had been taught to fear. His gentle manner contradicted everything she had heard from frontier gossip. The settlement tales of raids and ambushes did not match the patient care he showed as he tucked extra fur around her shoulders. In her exhaustion, confusion mixed with gratitude, and she finally surrendered to sleep, lulled by a feeling she had not felt for days, a fragile sense of safety. Morning arrived, muted by the lingering storm. Wind still howled outside the cave, swirling snow across the entrance. Eagle Shadow rose at dawn, checking on his unexpected companion. Amelia stirred when he knelt beside her to see if she needed more water. Though she was still wary, she found it within herself to meet his gaze. "I'm Amelia," she said haltingly, pressing a hand to her chest. He watched her intently, then mirrored her gesture, pressing his own palm to his chest. "Eagle Shadow," he pronounced, his English careful, as though the words were unfamiliar on his tongue. The hours that followed were cloaked in a hush of storm winds and snapping embers. Amelia tried to explain her predicament with scattered phrases: the group of settlers, her abandonment, the cold that threatened to end her life. She wasn't sure how much Eagle Shadow grasped, but his expression showed sympathy. Whenever her words faltered, he simply nodded, placing another piece of dried meat or a morsel of roasted rabbit into her trembling hands. Tentative trust began to form in that isolated cave, each gesture bridging two vastly different worlds. By late afternoon, the blizzard weakened. Sheets of snow still fell, but the worst had passed. Eager to move to a safer spot, Eagle Shadow guided Amelia outside. She had never seen such deep drifts, snow piled in waves against the mountainside, the sun's feeble light reflecting off every surface. Bracing herself against the cold, she followed him as he scouted along the ridges for a path forward. Each footstep was a chore, yet the presence of her rescuer kept her fear at bay. For days, they traveled together, forging a truce of necessity that soon grew into genuine friendship. Eagle Shadow taught her to identify edible roots beneath the snow, to conserve warmth by insulating her clothing with pine boughs. He hunted small game and shared each meal, mindful that survival favored cooperation. In turn, Amelia offered clumsy thanks in whispered English, occasionally repeating the handful of Cheyenne words Eagle Shadow had taught her. That quiet exchange was more comforting than any speech. Gradually, Amelia noticed deeper layers to her companion. His eyes often flickered with sadness, as though he carried unseen burdens. She gleaned from his few English words that he was traveling alone, separated from his tribe, and possibly haunted by past conflicts. Still, he refused to abandon her to the mercy of the wild. When wolves howled at night, he stood guard. When her feet blistered, he prepared an herbal poultice with practiced skill. On the 8th day of their trek, they descended into lower elevations where conifers thinned into sparser groves. The weather, while still harsh, began showing subtle hints of spring. Patches of earth peeked through the snow where the sun reached. Amelia's spirits lifted at the sight, but her relief was short-lived. Near dusk, They stumbled upon a settlement's burned remains, charred beams of wood, scattered debris, and scorched wagons. Dread coiled in her stomach. Who had done this? Bandits. Arrayed from one side or the other. Eagle Shadow motioned for silence, his posture tense. Tracks in the soot and snow indicated recent movement. Then, without warning, figures emerged from behind the wreckage, rough men, with hollow eyes and battered coats. Their guns glinted in the fading light. Amelia's heart seized with panic. She recognized one of them as a drifter who had parted ways with her original group of settlers. The man's face twisted in a sneer at the sight of her. "Loki here," he drawled, spitting tobacco juice into the ash. "Didn't expect to see a white woman running around with a redskin." Eagle Shadow stiffened. Amelia stepped back, fear lancing through her veins. The men advanced, rifles half raised, eyes brimming with malice. She sensed the hatred radiating from them, raw, unbridled aggression. Her throat went dry, recalling the day she had been abandoned. These men were worse, their cruelty amplified by desperation. Eagle Shadow shifted subtly, placing himself between Amelia and the armed group. One band. It aimed his rifle. "Leave that woman with us, savage, and maybe we'll let you run off." His tone was more threat than offer. Another man guffawed, casting a lascivious glance in Amelia's direction. Hot rage mingled with her terror. How could they treat a human life so cheaply? Eagle Shadow didn't reply in words. He drew an arrow from the quiver slung across his back, knocking it in a fluid movement. The bow creaked under tension. Panic seized Amelia's chest. Violence was about to erupt. The drifters responded instantly, shouting and raising their guns. A shot cracked the air, whistling past Eagle Shadow's ear. He dropped to one knee, releasing his arrow. It found its mark in the nearest assailant's shoulder, sending him sprawling with a scream. Chaos descended as bullets and arrows flew, echoing against the skeletal remains of the charred settlement. Amelia dove behind a fallen log, adrenaline pounding in her ears. She clutched the small pistol Eagle Shadow had handed her earlier, though she barely knew how to fire it. Her heart hammered at the memory of her abandonment. The snap of freezing wind. Never again, she vowed, would she be left helpless. She raised the pistol, hands shaking, and squeezed the trigger at a figure who loomed too close. The shot went wide, but it scattered the man's advance. Above the din, she heard Eagle Shadow's rhythmic release of arrows. Each shot was swift and purposeful. One drifter tumbled to the ground, cursing. Another darted behind a wagon. Gunfire lit the smoky twilight, muzzle flashes revealing savage glee on the men's faces. Amelia pressed her back against the log, teeth chattering from fear. Yet, through that fear, she felt a glimmer of resolve. Eagle Shadow had saved her life when no one else would. She couldn't cower now and watch him be overwhelmed. Taking a steadying breath, she peered around the log and spotted a drifter raising a revolver at Eagle Shadow's exposed flank. Amelia steadied the pistol, willed her shaking arms to obey, and pulled the trigger. The shot flew, grazing the attacker's arm and spoiling his aim. He roared in pain, giving Eagle Shadow enough time to wheel around and loose another arrow. A sickening thud ended the man's threat. Amelia realized with a shudder that she had helped take a life. Her stomach churned, but the alternative was letting a friend be shot down. The battle reached a frenzy. 3 of the drifters lay wounded or dead, and the others, faced with Eagle Shadow's unflinching defense, began to waver. Their leader howled curses at them, demanding they stand their ground. When Eagle Shadow advanced, arrow poised, the drifters broke. They fled, half dragging their injured comrades away in the smoke-laden twilight. Silence settled over the ruins, broken only by the crackle of settling timbers. Amelia rose on unsteady legs. Spent shells littered the ground, and her fingers ached from gripping the pistol. Eagle's shadow stood amid the debris, chest heaving, bow still in hand. Though he bore a shallow cut on his shoulder, his face was calm, almost serene. Meeting her wide-eyed stare, he dipped his head, as though to reassure her that the danger had passed. A wave of relief crashed over Amelia, along with a crushing sense of exhaustion. She staggered, body trembling, mind struggling to process the violence she just witnessed and participated in. Eagle's shadow moved to her side, steadying her by the elbow. Softly, in halting English, he said, "You are safe." Tears gathered in her eyes at those words, at the realization of how close she had come to a grisly fate. Her gratitude for this man, for his courage and protective spirit, surged like an overwhelming tide. They searched the ruins, hoping to find supplies or a place to spend the night. Most of the cabins were burned beyond use. Still, they managed to salvage a half-burned blanket, some canned goods in a scorched trunk, and enough unspoiled timber to erect a makeshift lean-to. There, beneath a half-sheltered overhang, Amelia and Eagle's shadow built a fire. As the flames danced, they dressed each other's wounds, his cut from a stray bullet, the abrasions on her knees where she had thrown herself behind the log. The night wind whistled through broken beams, whispering ghostly echoes of tragedy. Amelia let out a shaky sigh, reflecting on how cruel humanity could be. Yet a glance at Eagle's shadow's solemn profile reminded her that kindness, too, thrived in unlikely corners. Their bond, forged in adversity, deepened with each passing day. By the time the thick snow began to thaw, leaving muddy patches along the mountainsides, Amelia and Eagle's shadow had developed a silent rhythm. They traveled by day, seeking vantage points and safe trails. At night, they shared modest meals by the fire, exchanging words as best they could. Slowly, Amelia revealed how she had lost her husband to an illness, how that loss had pushed her to join the wagon train west, hoping for a fresh start. Eagle's shadow spoke, in fragmented English, of heartbreak within his tribe land taken, families scattered. Though their conversations were piecemeal, each word spoken built an unbreakable empathy. Amelia came to see that the savage she had been warned about was, in truth, a man of boundless courage and compassion. Late in winter, they descended further into valley terrain that promised easier foraging. But with the snowmelt came new perils, unpredictable floods, wild predators waking from hibernation, and the ever-present threat of other humans with violent intentions. One evening, they approached a small settlement perched near a river, hoping to trade some furs for provisions. Cautiously, they entered the dusty main street. A few suspicious faces peered out from sagging doorways. The local barkeep refused to serve their kind, ignoring Amelia's protests that Eagle's shadow was her friend. After a tense stare down, they left the settlement with little more than an extra bedroll and a handful of dried beans. Disappointment burned in Amelia's chest. She fumed at the closed-mindedness, at how easily prejudice drowned out basic decency. Nevertheless, they pressed on. Eagle's shadow's knowledge of the land became a lifeline as they circumvented large rivers and navigated game trails. On one misty morning, Amelia awoke to the haunting sound of a distant flute. She found Eagle's shadow perched on a rock overlooking a mist-shrouded valley, softly playing an instrument carved from bone. His melody drifted through the hush, reflecting both sorrow and hope. Tears welled in her eyes at the beauty of it. Here was a man who had every reason to hate, yet his music spoke of resilience, reminding her that even after the harshest winter, the seeds of spring can still bloom. Their alliance would soon be tested again, in a way neither anticipated. One crisp afternoon, while skirting the edge of a pine forest, they found themselves confronted by none other than the same group of settlers who had once abandoned Amelia. Led by their stern-faced captain, the settlers now traveled with a band of armed men, possible mercenaries, or hired guns. Tension crackled in the air as recognition dawned. The captain's expression was a twisted mixture of shock and something like guilt. His rifle, however, remained raised, pointing straight at Eagle's shadow. Amelia stepped forward, her heartbeat thrumming. "He saved my life," she began, voice trembling with emotion. She implored them to see that the man they called an enemy had been kinder to her than they ever were. But suspicion clouded their faces. The mercenaries sneered, dismissing her words as the hysterics of a woman gone native. One of them spat. "Let the savage pay for whatever trouble he caused." Eagle's shadow, sensing the hostility, warned Amelia to stand aside. She refused. In halting words, she demanded the settlers reconsider, to remember that she was once part of their group, someone they had cast out to die in the cold. Shame flickered in the eyes of a few, but the hard-faced captain barked out an order. The mercenaries cocked their rifles, forming a semicircle. Sickness churned Amelia's stomach. Her mind raced with the memory of frigid nights, the echo of gunshots, and the knowledge that kindness still existed, yet was so often drowned in ignorance. Suddenly, a single gunshot shattered the air. A mercenary had fired into the ground, a warning shot that made Amelia's blood run cold. Shouts erupted. Some settlers demanded a peaceful resolution. Others stoked the flames of aggression. Eagle's shadow stepped protectively in front of Amelia, bow in hand. In that harrowing moment, as chaos threatened to explode, something extraordinary occurred. A call echoed from the pines, a fierce cry that caught everyone off guard. Emerging from the forest, silent as wraiths, came a small band of native warriors. Their attire bore distinct patterns and colors that revealed them as Cheyenne kin. The leader, older and commanding, shouted a challenge. The mercenaries, startled, spun around to face this new threat. For an instant, the clearing brimmed with the potential for a bloody conflict on all sides. Yet that instant did not erupt into violence. Eagle's shadow, recognizing the new arrivals, called out in his language. Amelia saw relief flood his features. The Cheyenne band advanced, bows and lances at the ready. But their leader seemed more interested in Eagle Shadow's presence than in attacking the settlers. A tense standoff ensued, rifles pointed at bows, hearts pounding on both sides. Then, with measured authority, the older warrior placed a hand on Eagle Shadow's shoulder, greeting him as a brother returned from a distant land. In a move that defied the tension, Eagle Shadow held his bow aloft and lowered it to the ground, symbolizing his lack of violent intent. The older warrior followed suit, motioning for his companions to do the same. Murmurs rippled among the settlers, uncertainty mixing with fear. The captain's earlier bravado wavered. He took an uneasy step backward, for now lacking the stomach for a full-scale confrontation. Amelia, seizing the moment, stepped to the center of the clearing. She raised her arms, palms out, the universal gesture for peace. Drawing a breath, she addressed both groups. "He saved me when you abandoned me," she said, her voice echoing in the hush. "He proved that compassion is not tied to race or creed. Do not let hatred blind you to the humanity in front of you." Some of the settlers lowered their weapons, haunted by the memory of leaving her to die. Others looked unconvinced, but with the Cheyenne warriors present, they dared not escalate. The mercenaries, outnumbered and unsure, gave their captain questioning glances. Finally, with an angry curse. The captain signaled for his men to lower their rifles. Whatever vendetta or fear had fueled them, they were not prepared for a fight here and now. An uneasy truce settled. The two groups parted warily, each returning to their respective paths. Amelia and Eagle Shadow, accompanied by the small Cheyenne band, withdrew into the shelter of the pines. Only when the settlers and mercenaries disappeared over a ridge did everyone exhale. Relief, mixed with lingering tension, filled the forest grove. That evening, the Cheyenne band invited Amelia and Eagle Shadow to share their fire. The older warrior, Gray Thunder, spoke English well enough to hear Amelia's tale. His weathered face showed both sorrow and respect as the story of their survival and bond unfolded. Eagle Shadow, in his own language, explained how he had found Amelia near death in the snow, how he had protected her from predators both natural and human. Gray Thunder listened intently, then turned to Amelia and said, "You have witnessed hardship. You have also witnessed the truth of our people's spirit." He nodded at Eagle Shadow. "Your hearts are joined by fate." Amelia felt tears prick her eyes at the warmth in his words. Exhaustion wore on her, and after weeks of constant vigilance, a sense of relief washed over her. The Cheyenne band offered them provisions, even suggesting safe paths ahead. Eagle Shadow, for his part, accepted their help, but explained that he was bound westward, drawn to the land of his ancestors. Amelia realized in that moment that she wanted to follow him, no matter the hardships yet to come. Spring finally touched the high country. Snow receded from the meadows, revealing flowers that stretched toward the tentative sun. With each passing day, Amelia's steps grew more confident. The woman who had once fallen in the snow, abandoned and hopeless, now stood taller, shaped by trials and sustained by friendship. Eagle Shadow's presence was as steady as the sunrise. He was teacher and protector, an anchor against the tide of uncertainty. Yet dangers still lingered. Rumors circulated of drifters and outlaws preying on anyone crossing the frontier. Talk of cavalry patrols stirred fear among the tribes, who dreaded another conflict. Memories of that day in the ruined settlement haunted Amelia, but a deeper conviction guided her now, the knowledge that cruelty was not the domain of one race or people. She had seen bravery, decency, and selflessness thrive in the least expected places, and she had seen the opposite in those who were supposed to be her own kind. On a soft, moonlit night, as they camped beside a gently flowing stream, Amelia felt a shift in her soul. She caught her reflection in the water, next to Eagle Shadows, and recognized a woman transformed. In the hush, she found her voice. "I never asked why you chose to save me," she said quietly, pressing her hand to the silver locket that contained her late husband's picture. Eagle Shadow sat beside her on a fallen log, the embers of their fire casting flickers of orange across his features. After a long pause, he answered, choosing each word with care. "When I saw you, you were dying in the snow. I could not leave you. There is already too much death. My heart told me to help." Tears threatened to fall from Amelia's eyes as she nodded. She thought of all the times she had been taught to view his people as hostile or savage. Yet here, by the flowing water, she felt only gratitude and awe. The quiet lullaby of the stream underscored how fate had led them both to an impossible bond. Eagle Shadow placed his hand over hers, a tender gesture that transcended language. In the gentle glow of moonlight, they sat as equals, human souls adrift in a vast frontier, united by kindness and unbreakable trust. Summer arrived in a burst of color across the plains. The once frozen earth was now adorned with vivid wildflowers. Herds of buffalo grazed in the distance, and the sun burned with a harsh brilliance overhead. Eagle Shadow guided Amelia toward his ancestral region, a place he described in reverent tones, where his tribe's traditions were woven into the very soil. She saw a new light in his eyes, an anticipation tinged with sorrow. For all the land's beauty, it carried the weight of memory, of conflicts past and uncertain times to come. Just when they thought peace might be within reach, the specter of violence rose once more. Scouts from various tribes reported clashes with cavalry units ordered to push them onto reservations. Settlers continued to arrive, claiming land with little regard for those who called it home. Tensions simmered, threatening to boil over. Amelia tried to maintain hope, a faith nurtured by Eagle Shadow's quiet bravery and the empathy they had witnessed among those with open hearts. But fear gnawed at her. She wondered whether old hatreds might tear apart everything she and Eagle Shadow had built. One fateful morning, they came upon a Cheyenne encampment pitched near a winding river. Teepees dotted the grassy plain. Children played under the watchful eyes of elders, and a sense of community thrived, despite the looming dangers. Eagle Shadow's arrival caused a stir. Some recognized him and rushed forward in greeting, while others hung back warily, uncertain of the white woman at his side. Patiently, Eagle Shadow explained their story, how they had traveled together, saved one another. Soft murmurs rippled among the gathered. Amelia braced herself for rejection, but an elder woman, her hair silver as moonlight, approached and gently touched Amelia's hand. Though no words passed, the warmth in the elder's gaze conveyed acceptance. Overwhelmed, Amelia fought back tears. Among these people, she and Eagle Shadow found a momentary refuge. They helped gather herbs, fetch water from the river, and mend hides. Amelia marveled at the children's bright laughter and the love binding families. But the scar of conflict remained evident in the sorrow she saw in many eyes. Late at night, the elders spoke of forced moves, broken treaties, and the heartbreak of watching their land shrink beneath the boot of expansion. Inevitably, word arrived that cavalry soldiers were scouting the area, with orders to pacify or relocate any tribes they found. Fear rippled through the camp like a bitter wind. Warriors painted their faces and prepared for battle, while some families packed belongings in hopes of evading the soldiers. Amelia's heart ached at the idea that these people might be uprooted or, worse, slaughtered. She recalled her own helplessness in the snow, the gunfire she had faced, and the small miracles of empathy that had saved her. There had to be another way. She volunteered to join a small delegation meeting, the cavalry at an agreed-upon clearing. Despite the risks, she hoped that seeing a white woman standing with the Cheyenne might encourage the soldiers to parley instead of attack. Eagle Shadow insisted on going too, unwilling to leave her side. When they arrived at the clearing, tensions soared. The cavalry, mounted and armed, eyed the delegation warily. The Cheyenne warriors, equally tense, resisted the urge to lift their bows. Amelia, stepping forward, raised her hands to show she carried no weapon, summoning every ounce of courage. She pleaded for peace, explaining that these people wanted only to live on their ancestral lands. She spoke of how Eagle Shadow had rescued her, how the cruelty she had faced came not from a native tribe, but from settlers who abandoned her. The officer in command listened with a stony expression. Soldiers muttered, some sneering at what they saw as naive sentiment. Yet a seed of doubt stirred. Eventually, a single cavalryman, young, face still unlined, recognized Amelia's name from rumors of a widow rescued in the mountains. His hesitant testimony gave the officer pause. After a fraught silence, the officer agreed to carry word of the tribe's peaceful intentions back to his superiors before taking any drastic action. It was not a promise of safety, but it was a spark of hope. In the aftermath, Amelia trembled with relief, tears escaping as Eagle Shadow folded an arm around her shoulders. The Cheyenne delegation exchanged cautious nods, aware that this reprieve might be temporary, but for now, at least. Bloodshed had been averted. When they returned to the encampment, the mood was a mixture of guarded optimism and unspoken dread. Amelia helped distribute supplies, comfort children spooked by rumors of war, and share the story of how a gesture of good faith could, perhaps, hold back the darkness. Days turned to weeks. The cavalry did not attack, though the threat loomed like storm clouds at the horizon. Some families prepared to migrate further west, seeking safer ground. Eagle Shadow and Amelia stood at a crossroads. Should they remain with the tribe or continue their own journey? The elders, grateful for their efforts, said they would be honored if the couple stayed. Amelia's heart warmed at the idea of belonging to a community again, of forging a life untainted by prejudice. But Eagle Shadow was restless. In moments of reflection, she could see him gazing west, where the wide plains beckoned, a final link to his deeper heritage. Under a rising moon, they made their decision. The tribe offered their blessing and a small send-off. Amelia embraced the elder woman who had first welcomed her, tears glistening in both their eyes. Eagle Shadow clasped hands with the warriors, exchanging a bond that words could never fully express. Then he and Amelia departed, saddled horses provided by the tribe, venturing into a landscape of tall grass rustling in the night breeze. The next morning, from a gentle rise, they beheld a vista of limitless expanse. Buffalo roamed in the distance, dark shapes against the golden sea of grass. A hush fell over them, reverent as a prayer. Eagle Shadow dismounted, allowing the horses to graze. Amelia followed suit, feeling the beat of her heart align with the slow pulse of the land. She recalled each trial, freezing nights, gunfire, close calls with outlaws. Yet here, beneath an unbounded sky, she sensed the triumph of hope over despair. The stinging memories of betrayal no longer defined her. Love, courage, and the simple act of saving another had reshaped her life. They walked side by side, hand in hand. Amelia glanced at Eagle Shadow, saw the quiet light in his eyes as he surveyed the plains of his ancestors. She remembered his words, "There is already too much death." My heart told me to help. In his compassion, she had discovered the essence of humanity. And in her willingness to stand by him, she had reclaimed a sense of purpose beyond her grief and abandonment. Stopping at the crest of a small knoll, they watched the sun sink low on the horizon, bathing the grasslands in a fiery glow. Amelia placed her hand over the locket around her neck, thinking fondly of the husband she had lost, and acknowledging that her path had led here for a reason, reminding her that life could be reborn from sorrow. She lifted her gaze, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, and found Eagle Shadow watching her gently. In that brilliant twilight, as the world hushed to listen, Amelia realized the truth. The measure of a person was not stamped by race or tradition, but by the capacity for mercy and love in the face of adversity. Eagle Shadow embodied that truth, and so did she. Together, they had defied every boundary set by cruelty and ignorance. Together, they would forge a future that honored what was best in the human spirit. The breeze carried distant echoes of final farewell from the winter storms, a hint of the challenges still waiting ahead. But Amelia Parker, widow once cast aside in the frozen mountains, now stood tall. She was no longer alone, and neither was Eagle Shadow. Their story was not one of submission to fate, but of transformation. For as they walked forward into the gilded horizon, they carried with them an unbreakable bond, a testament to the power of kindness to triumph against all odds. And in their intertwined footsteps, a message echoed across the plains that hope, once kindled, can outlast even the coldest of winters and light the path for all who dare to follow.